But please, for starters, welcome. We've got Tricia Hayes from the DfT, then we've got Barry White from Transport for the North, Martin Tugwell from England's Economic Heartland, Rupert Clubb from Transport for the South East, and Maria Machancozes from Midlands Connect. Go.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps it could be Midlands Correct. I don't know. We can. So what we're going to do is everyone's going to start off by talking about a theme, and then we're just going to bring everybody else in off the back of that. So we're going to start off with Barry, and Barry, you're going to talk about the benefits of gaining statutory status, because you're the odd one out here, aren't you? You've got statutory status.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, we are a statutory body. In April this year, we became England's first subnational transport body, which is great. And well, I'm very happy talking about the benefits that brings to TfN. What I really want to stress, first of all, is what really matters in the long term is the benefits it brings to the North, and I'll talk about that as we go through the session, because that's what we're really about more than anything else. But the benefits that statutory status brings us as an organisation, I would divide into two categories. One is quite practical, but one is just very much at the heart of what we do. And the practical advantage is that while we worked very well in shadow form for a number of years, we weren't an employer of people, we couldn't procure in our own right, and in the long term, being a statutory body allows you to actually have your own accounts, employ your own consultants, but most importantly, attract and retain really great people in that organisation. And I think that is really at the heart of what we in Transport for the North need. And that is sort of the practical difference becoming a statutory body actually makes. But the really fundamental difference is it gives us a set of powers, and it gives us a basis in which we can input it to the government process that isn't possible otherwise. And those powers being passed by Parliament and consented to by 56 local authorities in the north of England gives you a position that you don't have without that statutory status. And it is those powers that will allow us to articulate the evidence to secure the investment in the north of England that we think is very much needed, and it's very much needed to drive the economy forward. So I think becoming a statutory body, and England's first subnational transport body, does two things, both practical but very fundamental, and I think it gives us the foundation to drive forward from.
Can you define those powers a little bit? Because obviously compared to London, and I think, was it John Prescott got a bit hot under the collar about it and came out and said that, actually it's a bit of a sham, there are no powers. So can you define exactly what your powers are and whether you would like to get to that kind of London status in the future?
Well, you're quite right. John Prescott, when we were launching consultation on our statutory transport plan, said, doesn't have powers like Transport for London. And he's quite right. We don't have powers like Transport for London, but we're fundamentally different. And we don't want Transport for London's powers because actually they run an urban transport business. We don't. We're a pan-northern strategic transport link business. And fundamentally, if we had powers to borrow, we have no income source like Transport for London do have from the bus and tube income to pay that borrowing back. What we want to do is articulate the evidence to get central government funding for investment in the north, not necessarily by borrowing. So actually, even if we had borrowing powers tomorrow, we couldn't use them. So you have to look what you want powers for and what you want to do with them, rather than just sort of say we should be like that body or that body. Now, there's certainly an appetite amongst many of our members in the north to ask for more powers over time, but actually what our job at the moment is to make the most of the powers we have. And I think those powers that include being the co-client for one of the biggest rail projects to take place in the UK in the next 15 years, to provide advice to the Secretary of State on investment priorities for the North, to run a smart ticketing programme for the North. These are all good powers to have, and my job as Chief Executive is to make the most of those.
I'll bring the three of you in now, because am I right in thinking you're all looking to get status 2020? Is that right? What is the process to getting that statutory status?
We in the Midlands are in a crucial moment of defining what the role of Midlands Connect as a statutory STB will be. And Barry's absolutely right. It is totally wrong to start saying, so are you following the London model? Are you actually following the TFN model? And the Midlands is certainly trying to follow its own, is what it needs, the Midlands, to really secure the investment that we require in transport and economic growth. So we are in that process at the moment. We have already undertaken a consultation with our partners, and they have given us clear views of there is an appetite to pursue statutory. What we need to do more than anything is define those powers clearly. And that's what we will be doing in the next 2 months, I hope. By March, we will be very clear in our vision for Midlands Connect. But we also need to work with government. I think there's an appetite to understand a bit more what a statutory STB, how it will fit in the national arena, and what role, what policy, what vision has government got for STBs. So this is a really important time for the Midlands. We need, as I said, internally rehearse and agree which powers will really benefit the Midlands at this present time. But in parallel, we need to also get that clarity from government in terms of what is it that government will do differently as us becoming a statutory, what role, what play we will have in those very important national investment programs, in the decision making, in the prioritization going forward. So very important times.
And for England's economic heartland, we've had the benefit of the National Infrastructure Commission looking at the potential of the corridor over the last couple of years, and it's very clear from the government's response in the budget only last month that this is a national priority. Indeed, all the regions are and realising our economic potential is a national priority. And we, very much like Barry and Maria, are saying, looking to develop our proposal for the STB that reflects the powers we need to deliver our transport strategy. So the work on the transport strategy is underway in parallel with the work to develop the STB proposal. We're looking to have both ready for consultation and engagement later next year. And as you say, Richard, having that established from 2020 with the powers to be able to deliver the strategy.
Tricia, we'll definitely bring you in a second, but I just want to quickly hear from Rupert. So is Transport for the North kind of the template then for you guys, and you look at what they did and adjust your particular powers that you want around it, or does everyone get the same thing?
I think that the key for me is it's not one size fits all. We're all very different, and the powers that we seek need to reflect that difference. So, for example, in the southeast, we know we're the international gateway for the UK. The movement of goods and services through the various ports and airports is fundamental to the success of the rest of the country. And so the powers that we seek are undoubtedly going to be different to TFNs or Midlands Connect or Economic Heartland. For us, we are in the throes of taking our constituent members, our board members, through the development of the powers, helping everybody understand, what are these powers that we would be seeking, and what are we hoping to achieve? How does it facilitate economic growth, housing, so on and so forth? There's a period of consultation that we'll need to follow, and I would expect this time next year we'd be looking to submit our proposal for statutory status to government.
I'm going to bring Tricia in now. If anyone does have a question, I'll ask the floor after this. So have a think. Put your hand up if you've got a question. We'll get a microphone to you. But Tricia, Maria was basically saying, where do they stand? So what's the DFT's view?
So thank you very much. Before I answer that question, I think I would just like to say I'm really delighted to be on a panel with these four people. This is an increasingly important leadership community within the transport sector. They are spending an alarming amount of time together now. So it's really, really great to be part of this important panel. On the question of subnational transport bodies, first to say, completely agree with my colleagues. The London comparison is not the right comparison, and I really hope we can stop making it because it doesn't help anybody. On statutory status, we're very clear that whether or not a subnational transport body wants to be statutory is down to its membership and its citizens. This is not something where government is going to be trying to push people in a particular direction. Where a decision has been taken to go statutory, we will support through that process, and we worked incredibly closely with TfN in the run-up to statutory status. But statutory status is not a panacea. It brings with it obligations as well as opportunities. Statutory status places requirements on the organisation, and I think you have to have a certain amount of critical mass for the things that you're doing, for your budget, for your activities, before some of the things that statutory status brings with it are actually worth doing at a practical level. So I'm very receptive to what subnational transport bodies want to do, but I absolutely won't be nudging them in any particular direction.
Right, does anyone have a question about statutory status? Or, yes, at the back there, and we've got one at the front here after that. So could we get a microphone to this guy?
Hi, thanks. A question for Tricia Dominic Brown at Highways Magazine. What actual opportunities will statutory status provide? Because we know John Prescott famously disputed whether it actually makes any difference.
So there isn't a single model for statutory status. Barry talked through some of the components of the things that TfN has statutory status on, the responsibilities on smart ticketing, the co-clienting of Northern Powerhouse Rail. But a statutory model elsewhere could be completely different, and it will depend very much on what is the bit of economic geography that a STB is covering and what's it trying to achieve. I think the one thing that is a common thread, though, through the statutory status process is that you can see it as a mechanism for keeping government honest in having an obligation to listen to and take account of the work that STDs are doing on planning and priority setting. Now, that's not to say that government doesn't do that anyway, and I hope that all the STBs here are seeing us be very actively listening on exercises like the development of RIS2 and future rail planning. But statutory status turns that intention into an obligation, and I think that's quite a material change.
Barry, you wanted to come in?
Just very briefly coming in on that was the statutory status that we sought on behalf of 16 million people in the north of England. It is a very big chunk of the English population in the north of England. So I do think there's a matter of scale in this potentially as well. And certainly we felt to have a strong, unified and determined voice for the north of England, statutory status was both important in achieving that, but also the mechanism through which it can be delivered to government as well. So I think for us, it was those two things, the ability to have that strong voice, but also the mechanism to deliver it too.
Is there a quick question at the front as well? Did you want to?
Yes, John Lamb from the Local Government Technical Advisors Group. There's been a lot of focus on the national investment decisions, the powers to deliver. There's also surely a requirement and a responsibility to say no in certain instances, and at times it can be quite convenient if it's Whitehall in London saying no. How do you manage those conflicts across 56 councils or the dozen or so councils in Transport for the South East who are much closer to the democratic base upon which you will be the statutory body?
Well, I think that's the opportunity, actually. So you're right, it can be a challenge because we had a recent example where we were asked to select a number of projects to be eligible to bid into a major roads network pot of money. And we had something like 16 applications in the north that we narrowed down to 6. Now, I think that is actually much better happening in the north by people in the north making those sort of decisions, because I think it gives ownership of that in the north rather than going to Tricia, here's 16 projects, you deliver all the bad news. But actually, I think that's what we see that as an opportunity rather than a challenge. It's not easy, but that, I think, is the responsibility our members, our elected members, want to have for the north as well. So actually, we would rather make those tough decisions in the north where they need to be made, but give us the responsibility to do it.
Everyone wants to go here. So Maria, you're next.
I'd really like to start by saying what the leaders, by coming together in Midlands Connect, have agreed is to actually avoid, conflict, to come up with a joint vision and a joint voice on what needs to happen, when, and also how, too. So there's a huge element of commitment to make life easier, actually, to central government on reaching a decision as a united voice, and also having articulated clearly what is it that needs to be delivered when in the Midlands. So let's make it very clear. This is about making national programs, national schemes work for the Midlands, and therefore the important thing here is we are committed to actually get all the bruises, all the punches amongst ourselves to make it much easier for government when it comes to decision making. And that's what is important, that we have the dialogue with government to say, and therefore, how serious are you going to take our voice when it comes to that time? So it really is important to stress out that this is really our local leaders already agreeing to collaborate and to make things easier for the benefit of the Midlands.
Rupert, you were mentioned in the question.
I mean, similar point, really. Transport for the South East is built upon consensus. It brings that opportunity for 16 local authorities, local transport authorities, 5 local enterprise partnerships, operators, transport focus, a whole combination to come together and speak to government with one voice. As we step through our governance arrangements, we will be looking to determine our priorities and determining with the order in which they're delivered by consensus. And I think that, to my mind, that's the strength. We're moving away from what I would call a historical transactional relationship with government towards one that is more collaborative. At the end of the day, we're seeking to achieve similar aims. We both want to facilitate economic growth. We want to support housing. We want our economy to thrive. STBs are well placed to do that, and that collaborative relationship is going to be fundamental.
Tricia, are you feeling that the relationship is changing as you're going along quite quickly, actually?
A couple of quick observations. So I think that the question was a bit fatalistic about the ability for subnational transport bodies to do prioritisation. I think first is we've seen it happening already. I think Barry's example is a good one. And we've seen it happen in previous lives as well. So some of you may remember the era of regional funding allocations, where we pushed very similar questions to regions and said, tell us not necessarily what things you want us to do and not want to do, but give us a sense of the order and sequence that you want to see things delivered. And I think that time dimension can be really helpful in unlocking a consensual approach between political leaders about an overall program. So not everybody will get what they want today, but you take a long view and you set out a long-term process, and you can generally get to a point where people are happy with a package. The other thing I want to just be really clear about, and there's a question coming out of the discussion, is what will make government listen to subnational transport bodies? And we've talked a bit about statutory status and the obligation that brings, but there are two things, there are two other parts of this question which are equally and arguably more important. The first is the work good work? Is the quality of the work being delivered at an analytical and professional level by these new leadership communities? Is it good work? And I would have to say, having been working with these people for a couple of years now, there is some fantastic work going on in the subnational bodies. And then the second thing is the work that everybody is signed up to? So is there consensus around the product of the work? And again, it's work in process, but we're definitely heading in the right direction.